Our Messiah, Jesus Christ, spent a lot of time dealing with the suffering caused by bloodthirsty men of his time. As we better understand who was behind the cruel crucifixion of our Savior, based on the testaments of the Bible, an intriguing question arises. What happened to these men who caused Jesus' death? In this video, we will delve into the tragic deaths of those responsible for Christ's crucifixion, starting with the famous governor Pontius Pilate, about whom historians know very little, the cruel judge who gave in to the crowd's clamor to sentence Jesus to death. Some say he was born in Italy, others think he was born in Scotland, but what is known is that he served as Roman prefect of Judea and was governor during Christ's ministry. According to Philo of Alexandria, a Jewish philosopher who lived in 58 AD, Pilate was a terrible judge who robbed people, executed them without trial, and was completely cruel. In the Bible, in John 18:37, we see Pilate questioning Jesus about being a king, and Jesus responds, "You say I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth." According to the Roman historian Tacitus, Pontius Pilate was removed from office and sent back to Rome for using excessive force. But the story doesn't end there. According to Eusebius of Caesarea, Pilate ended up taking his own life on the orders of Emperor Caligula, and to make everything even more tragic, they say his body was thrown into the Tiber River. Scientists even found evidence of its existence there, as if the crucifixion wasn't enough. The next person on our list is Cassius Lenus, the Roman centurion who made sure Jesus took his last breath on the cross. He is known as the soldier who pierced the side of Christ's chest. The name of this centurion from Cappadocia, Turkey, appears in the Gospel of Nicodemus, a forbidden book of the Bible, but no biblical story mentions his name. According to this book, Cassius became a devout Christian after his eyesight was impaired by the blood and water that came out of Christ's body and splashed into his eyes. Because of this new faith, he ended up being arrested and beheaded, becoming one of the first martyrs. For a long time, people believed that his severed head had magical powers and that he cured the blind King Herod of Judea, the same Herod who also died a horrible death for plotting the death of Christ during his reign from 74 to 4 BC. Herod, a true puppet of Rome, ruled Judea, an independent territory, but still under strong Roman influence. In the Bible, he is portrayed as a cruel man who, despite not being directly involved in Jesus' crucifixion, committed terrible acts. The worst of them was the massacre of innocents. When he learned of the arrival of the Son of God, Herod was desperate to eliminate the Messiah before he grew up, fearing he would lose the throne to a possible rival. He ordered the death of all children in Bethlehem aged 2 and under. As it is written in Matthew 2:18, "A voice was heard in Ramah, lamentation, weeping, and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, refusing to be comforted because they are no more." Herod's cruelty went beyond killing those far from him. He was also responsible for the brutal murder of 3 of his own children and 1 of his wives. You might wonder what makes his death deserve a place in this discussion. Experts believe Herod died from problems related to gonorrhea or kidney failure. According to Jan Hamann from the University of Washington, the evidence comes from reports about the king's last days. He suffered from intense itching and a lot of pain in his intestines, difficulty breathing, frequent convulsions, and a serious infection in his genitals. Considering the seriousness of the things he did, like killing innocent children for fear of losing the throne, you could even say that he deserved an even more horrible death. Now let's talk about another man who died a terrible death at the hands of a relative, Emperor Tiberius. He ruled Rome from AD 14 to 37, but the Gospels never say he had any involvement in the plot to kill Jesus. It may not seem so relevant today, but 2,000 years ago, Judea was far removed from Rome's interests. This means that the main Roman authorities at the time probably didn't even know what was going on there. Because of this, Pontius Pilate managed to execute Jesus without facing much resistance. For years after Christ's death, Roman emperors remained in the dark about what had happened. Their ignorance, in a way, also contributed to the death of our Messiah. According to the Roman historian Suetonius, Tiberius was starved, poisoned, and suffocated with a pillow by his great-nephew Caligula, who went on to become one of Rome's most infamous emperors. Next on the list is someone you could easily compare to a traitorous friend, Judas Iscariot, one of Christ's 12 apostles. Judas was the follower who handed his master over to the authorities, leading Jesus to crucifixion in exchange for 30 pieces of silver. He offered to betray Jesus, leading Roman soldiers to the Garden of Gethsemane and identifying him with a kiss. As it says in Acts 1:18, this man bought a field with the payment of his betrayal, and falling on his head, his body burst open and his entrails spilled out. Shortly after betraying Jesus, Judas died a shameful death, hanging himself after returning the money and regretting what he had done. His body underwent such terrible decomposition that his intestines practically exploded. The next traitor to divinity was also one of Christ's disciples, the Apostle Peter. Although his betrayal was not as severe as that of Judas Iscariot, he still played an important role in the downfall of Jesus. Most of us already know the story of Peter, the apostle who denied his master 3 times while Jesus was being hunted. When a servant and 2 other people asked about his relationship with Jesus, Peter did not hesitate to deny the divine. Even though he was remorseful afterwards, he still betrayed Jesus in the most crucial moments before his death. And how do you think Peter met his end? It wasn't much different from Jesus. He was sentenced to death by crucifixion by Emperor Nero in Rome in 64 AD in an attempt to replicate the death of Christ. However, feeling unworthy to die in the same way as his Savior, Peter asked to be crucified upside down, making his death even more painful and cruel. Finally, we come to the last man considered responsible for the death of our Savior. When Jesus was sentenced to crucifixion, the high priest Joseph Caiaphas followed Jewish tradition and ordered his imprisonment within the temple fence until a council of priests could judge the case. With the clear intention of killing Jesus as soon as possible, Caiaphas carried out his plan in secret, and the verdict was announced in the middle of the night. He and his father-in-law, Annas, conspired together to eliminate the Messiah, using their influence as religious leaders during Christ's ministry. After being questioned, Jesus was taken directly to Caiaphas, who had been the high priest for about 12 years. Even without the authority to order executions, Caiaphas accused Jesus of blasphemy, and with the help of the governor Pontius Pilate, managed to sentence him to death. It is said that Caiaphas lived for many years after the death of Christ, spending his last days overcome with sadness and regret until he died of old age in 66 AD. On the island of Crete, of all the men involved, Caiaphas may have died the least horrible death, but only God knows what his fate was after what he did to Jesus. When Christ died and rose again, he was fetched by his angels. Click on the next video to learn about the 10 angels and their roles in heaven.